On Christmas night, the house was glowing with lights and laughter, and the smell of pine and roasted meat filled the air, while I sat at the table believing this holiday still meant family, until my daughter-in-law lifted her glass and said it casually like a joke that everyone else seemed to enjoy, that they had spent 90% of my savings on their new house, and before I could even process the words, my own son smirked and leaned back in his chair, telling me I was broke now, Dad. And in that moment the room went quiet inside my chest. Not because of shock, but because something finally broke that had been bending for years. I smiled. Not because I was weak, but because they had no idea what they had just set in motion. And if you have ever been betrayed by the people you sacrificed everything for, then you already know this feeling, the kind where humiliation burns, but clarity cuts sharper than anger. Stay with me, because what looked like the end of my dignity was only the beginning of their downfall. This story is not about shouting or violence. It is about patience, precision, and watching people who thought they had won slowly realize they never understood the rules of the game. You will hear how a holiday meant to celebrate love turned into the moment mask slipped, how greed revealed itself in a single sentence, and how silence became my strongest weapon. And if you think this ends with me begging or forgiving, you are wrong, because by the time they understood what those savings really were, Christmas was already over, and the lesson waiting for them would last far longer than the season stay. Until the end, because what happens next is the kind of justice that arrives quietly, but leaves nothing standing and proves that underestimating the wrong person is the most expensive mistake of all. My name is Arthur Lawson. I am 68 years old, a retired accountant who spent 41 years helping small businesses keep their books straight and their dreams alive. My wife Maggie passed away 4 years ago, and since then I have lived quietly in a small apartment in Denver, tending to her memory, and believing that family, however imperfect, was still the one thing worth holding on to. The snow was falling gently on Christmas Eve. When I pulled into Daniel's driveway, I had driven 30 minutes across town with a trunk full of carefully wrapped presents, the same way I had done every year since my son was born. The radio played Silent Night, and for a moment, sitting in my old sedan, I let myself believe this would be a good evening. I wanted to believe it after 4 years of holidays without Maggie. I needed something to feel like home again. But the moment I stepped out of the car, something felt different. The driveway held a brand new SUV I had never seen before, its chrome gleaming under the porch lights. The house itself seemed transformed, new shutters, new landscaping through the window. I could see furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine, not in the modest home my son and his wife had complained about for years. I stood there for a moment, gifts in my arms, doing the math I had done all my life. New car, new furniture, new everything. The numbers did not add up to Daniel's salary. I walked inside. Anyway, Vanessa greeted me at the door with her usual smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes. She was 42, polished and precise, the kind of woman who knew exactly how much everything cost, and made sure everyone else knew too. She kissed my cheek without warmth and gestured toward the living room. "Merry Christmas, Dad. Make yourself comfortable." Daniel appeared from the kitchen holding a glass of wine, my son, 45 years old. And somewhere along the way, he had become a stranger, wearing a familiar face. He nodded at me the way you might acknowledge a neighbor you barely know. "Hey, Dad, glad you could make it." I set the presents under the tree, noticing how small and plain they looked, next to the mountain of designer boxes already there. My granddaughter Lily sat in the corner, 7 years old, drawing. Quietly in a sketchbook, she looked up and smiled at me, and for a moment I remembered why I kept coming back. Dinner was elaborate. Vanessa had spared no expense as we ate. She talked about the new house, the new car, the new plans for renovations. I listened and said little, watching the way she and Daniel exchanged glances, as if they were sharing a private joke. Then, between the main course and dessert, Vanessa set down her fork and looked at me with an expression I will never forget. It was triumph, barely disguised as casual conversation. "You know, Dad," she said, "we should really thank you for making all this possible." I tilted my head slightly. "What do you mean?" She laughed, that light, careless sound she made when she was most pleased with herself. "The house, the car, everything we used. Your savings, well, most of it 90% to be exact." She waved her hand, as if swatting away something trivial. "We got it below market value. The sellers were desperate. You should thank us for investing your money so wisely." Daniel leaned back in his chair and grinned. "Face it, Dad, you're basically broke now." The room went quiet. Lily looked up from her sketchbook, confused by the sudden silence. I could feel Vanessa watching me. Waiting for the collapse she had surely imagined, the tears, the shouting, the desperate pleas. Instead, I looked at both of them calmly. I thought of Maggie, of the envelope she had left me, of the 6 months I had spent watching and waiting. I thought of the email Daniel had accidentally forwarded to me, the one that revealed everything I thought of all the things they did not know. And then I smiled. Just slightly, and said 2 words I know. Vanessa blinked, her triumphant expression flickered, then faltered. Daniel's grin faded into confusion. They had expected a broken old man. What they got was something they could not read, something that unsettled them in a way they could not name, because the calm in my voice was not defeat. It was patience, and patience, I have learned, is the quietest form of power. I stayed the night in their guest room, as I always did on Christmas Eve, but sleep did not come easily. I lay in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of Vanessa and Daniel talking downstairs. Their voices rose and fell, too quiet to make out the words, but I could guess the conversation. They were probably celebrating, toasting their victory over the foolish old man who had made their new life possible. Let them celebrate. I thought, let them believe they have won. The next morning, I came downstairs to find Vanessa already in the kitchen, brewing coffee with sharp, irritated movements. She barely looked at me when I sat down at the breakfast table. Daniel appeared a few minutes later, his face carrying the uncertain expression of a man who had expected fireworks and gotten silence instead. Vanessa set a plate of toast in front of me without a word. I thanked her politely and ate slowly, watching them both from the corner of my eye. She kept glancing at me, waiting for something, a breakdown, perhaps tears, accusations, some dramatic confrontation that would confirm I was exactly what she thought I was, a helpless old man whose spirit had been crushed. I gave her nothing. When I finished eating, I stood, rinsed my plate in the sink, and reached for my coat. "Thank you for breakfast," I said calmly. "I should be getting home." Vanessa's composure cracked just slightly. "That's it," she asked, her voice sharp. "You're just leaving?" I turned to look at her. "It's the day after Christmas. I imagine you have plans." She stared at me as if I had spoken in a foreign language. Daniel shifted uncomfortably by the doorway, his coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the dawning realization that something was not adding up. "Dad," he said slowly, "are you sure you're okay?" I smiled at him, the same slight smile I had given them the night before. "I'm fine, son, Merry Christmas." And then I left. I learned later what happened after I drove away. Daniel told me months afterward, when the truth had finally broken through the walls he had built around his conscience. He said Vanessa had paced the kitchen for nearly an hour, growing more agitated with every passing minute. Why isn't he angry? She had demanded, slamming her hand on the counter. We just told him we took everything. He should be devastated. He should be begging us to give it back. Old people are supposed to fall apart when you take their security away. Daniel had tried to calm her down, but his own unease was growing. He knew me better than Vanessa did. He had grown up watching me work, watching me solve problems that seemed impossible, watching me think 3 moves ahead while everyone else was still figuring out their first something's wrong. He had muttered more to himself than to her. "He's too calm, Dad. Never reacts like this unless he already knows something we don't." Vanessa had dismissed him with a wave of her hand. "You're overthinking it. He's just a tired old man who's accepted reality. Give him a week and he'll come crawling back, asking us to take care of him. That's how this works." But Daniel was not so sure, and for the first time in years a small seed of doubt had taken root in his mind. I knew none of this as I drove home that morning, but I suspected it. I had spent 41 years reading numbers and the people behind them. Vanessa was easy to read because her greed made her predictable. Daniel was harder because somewhere beneath the weakness there was still a flicker of the boy I had raised. Whether that flicker would ever become a flame again, I did not know. When I reached my apartment, I went straight to the bedroom closet behind a stack of old sweaters, tucked into the corner where no one would think to look. Sat the fireproof box Maggie had given me before she died. I had not opened it in 4 years. She had made me promise to wait. "You'll know when it's time," she had said, her voice weak but certain. "When they show their true colors, open it. Everything you need is inside." I carried the box to my bed and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in a layer of soft cloth, was a sealed envelope. Maggie's handwriting graced the front, in her familiar, elegant script, "Open. When they show their true colors." Beside the envelope lay a small USB drive, unlabeled, waiting. I picked up the envelope and held it to the light from the window. The paper was thick, but not thick enough to hide everything through the cream and colored surface. I could see the outline of something else inside, not just a letter, something small and metallic, a key. My heart beat a little faster. Even in death, Maggie was still protecting me, still guiding me, still 3 steps ahead of everyone who thought they could take advantage of the man she loved. I set the envelope down, gently, not yet ready to open it. The time would come soon, but first I wanted to see just how far Vanessa and Daniel would go. I wanted to know the full measure of their betrayal before I revealed the full measure of my response. Patience, Maggie used to say, is not waiting. It is knowing when to act, and I was very close to knowing. The envelope sat on my kitchen table for 3 days. I walked past it every morning, touched its edges every evening, but I did not open it. Something told me that once I read whatever Maggie had left inside, there would be no going back. The truth, whatever it was, would demand action, and before I acted, I needed to understand exactly what I had lost, not the money. The money was significant. Yes, $180. Zero does not disappear without consequence. But as I sat alone in my quiet apartment, watching the winter light fade through the windows, I realized that the ache in my chest had nothing to do with bank accounts or savings. The wound was deeper than that. The wound was my son. I found myself thinking about the 3 years before Maggie died, the years when her illness consumed everything, when the diagnosis came. We had plans. We were going to travel, see the Grand Canyon, visit the little town in Italy where her grandmother was born. We had saved carefully, dreamed quietly, waited patiently for the retirement we had earned. Instead, we got hospitals, treatment specialists who spoke in careful, measured tones about odds and options. I sold my workshop, the small space I had rented for years, where I restored antique furniture on weekends. I cancelled every trip, every plan, every dream that did not involve keeping Maggie alive for one more day. I spent every penny I could spare, and some I could not, because what is money compared to time with the woman you love? During those 3 years, Daniel visited twice. The first time he stayed for an afternoon. Vanessa had some event she could not miss, he explained. So he came alone. He sat by his mother's bed for 2 hours, checked his phone 11 times and left before dinner. The second visit was shorter, brought flowers that Maggie was allergic to, stayed for 45 minutes and spent most of it answering work emails in the hallway. Vanessa never came at all. Not once in 3 years. She sent a card when Maggie entered hospice, a generic sympathy card with a printed message and her name signed at the bottom. No personal note, no explanation, just her signature, as if checking off a task on a list. I didn't say anything at the time. I was too focused on Maggie, too exhausted from the endless cycle of hope and grief that comes with watching someone you love fade away. But Maggie noticed, she always noticed everything one evening. Near the end, she held my hand and spoke in a voice so weak I had to lean close to hear her watch how she talks about old people. Arthur, listen to the words she uses when she thinks no one important is paying attention. She paused to catch her breath. That's how she'll talk about you one day, when I'm gone and you're the only one left. I tried to protest, but she squeezed my fingers with what little strength remained, and Daniel, she continued, her eyes glistening. He loves you, I believe that, but he's weak, Arthur. He's always been weak. He'll choose the path of least resistance every time, even if that path runs right over your heart. She looked at me with an intensity that cut through the fog of medication and exhaustion. Don't let his weakness become your wound. Promise me. I promised. But I didn't truly understand until Christmas Eve, when I sat at their table and watched my son laugh at my ruin, when I saw him glance at Vanessa for approval before every word, when I realized that the boy who once looked at me like I could fix anything had become a man who would not lift a finger to defend me. That was the real loss, not 180s. It drew zero that money could be recovered one way or another. What could not be recovered was the son. I thought I had raised the son who wrote me letters from summer camp, the son who cried at his mother's funeral and held my hand through the darkest night of my life. That son was gone, replaced by a stranger who had chosen comfort over courage, convenience over conscience. On the fourth day, I finally opened. The envelope inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Maggie's handwriting. The letters were shaky, written during her final weeks, when even holding a pen was a battle, but the words were clear as she had always been. My dearest Arthur, if you're reading this, then they've finally shown you who they really are. I'm sorry I couldn't warn you while I was alive. I tried, but you weren't ready. 2. I hear it. You loved Daniel too much to see the truth. The evidence is in the blue folder, and on this drive, use them when you're ready to stop being kind. Beneath her signature, she had added one more line. Underlined twice, being kind is a virtue. Being kind to people who hurt you is just permission. I held the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. Even now, even from beyond the grave, Maggie was still fighting for me. The question was whether I was ready to fight for myself. Helen Brooks arrived on New Year's Day carrying a casserole dish, and the kind of worried expression that told me the news had already traveled through our circle of old friends. She had known Maggie since college, had stood beside her at our wedding, had wept at her funeral if anyone had earned the right to show up unannounced. At my door, it was Helen. I let her in and put the kettle on, while she settled into the chair by the window. She was 70 years old, sharp-eyed and silver-haired, with the quiet strength of a woman who had weathered her own share of storms. She watched me move around the kitchen with an expression caught somewhere between concern and confusion. Arthur, she finally said, I heard what happened. Daniel's wife has been telling everyone who will listen that you gave them your savings as a gift, that you insisted on it. She paused, her voice tightening. But I know that's not true. I know what Maggie left you. I know how carefully you both planned for your retirement. I poured 2 cups of tea and sat down across from her. It's not true. I confirmed they took it without asking, used my account access to buy themselves a house. Helen's face went pale. They stole from you. Your own son stole from you. Yes, she stared at me, waiting for more, waiting for the anger, the despair, the broken old man performance that everyone seemed to expect when it didn't come. Her confusion deepened. Arthur, they stole your life savings, and you're sitting here drinking tea like nothing happened. What is going on? I smiled faintly, the same smile that had unsettled Vanessa on Christmas Eve. Sit back, Helen. There's something I need to tell you. Something I haven't told anyone. She leaned forward, instead her hands wrapped around her teacup, her eyes fixed on mine. 6 months ago, I began. Daniel sent me an email by accident. It was meant for Vanessa, but he copied my address instead of hers. I don't think he even noticed the subject line was Dad's. Accounts, and for a moment I thought maybe he was planning something nice, a surprise for my birthday perhaps, some gesture to show he still remembered who I was. I paused, letting the memory settle. But that's not what it was. The email contained instructions, details about my bank accounts, my savings, my pension deposits. There were notes about when the best time would be to access the money without raising suspicion. There was even a line written by Vanessa that said, "We need to move before the old man figures out what we're doing." Helen's hand flew to her mouth. "Arthur, you knew I knew everything. I read that email 6 months ago, and I said nothing but why." Her voice cracked with disbelief. "Why didn't you stop them? Why didn't you change your passwords, close the accounts, confront them?" I looked down at my tea, watching the steam curl and vanish, because I needed to answer a question, Helen, a question that had been haunting me ever since Maggie died. I met her eyes again. I needed to know if my son would stop himself. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of what I was saying. I gave Daniel 6 months. I continued 6 months to look at those plans, to think about what he was doing, to remember who raised him and who loved him and who sacrificed everything to give him a good life. I gave him 6 months to pick up the phone and say, "Dad, I need to tell you something. Vanessa wants to take your money, and I can't let that happen." My voice broke slightly, and I had to pause to steady myself. He never called, not once. He saw those plans, he participated in those discussions, and he never once tried to warn me. He never once chose me over her. Helen reached across the table and took my hand. Her eyes were wet. "Oh, Arthur, the money can be recovered," I said quietly. "One way or another, I'll be fine." Maggie made sure of that. But what I lost on Christmas Eve wasn't $180. What I lost was the last hope I had for my son, the hope that somewhere inside him the boy I raised still existed, the boy who used to run to me when he was scared, the boy who said he wanted to be just like his dad when he grew up. I withdrew my hand gently and looked out the window at the grey January sky. That boy is gone, and no amount of money can bring him back. Helen was silent for a long moment, processing everything I had told her. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "So what happens now?" I turned back to face her, and something in my expression must have changed, because she drew a sharp breath. The grief was still there, would probably always be there, but beneath it now was something harder, something that had been sleeping for 6 months and was finally ready. "2. Wake now," I said slowly. "They learn that silence works both ways." Helen's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" I stood and walked to the closet where the fireproof box still sat. I retrieved the blue folder Maggie had mentioned in her letter, the USB drive that held secrets I had not yet explored, and the small key whose purpose I was only beginning to understand. Maggie knew, I said, setting the items on a table between us. She saw what Vanessa was years before I did. She gathered evidence, she made plans, she left me everything I need to protect myself. Helen looked at the folder, then back at me. "Arthur, what are you going to do?" I sat down again, my hands resting calmly on either side of the folder. "I'm going to wait a little longer. I'm going to let them think they've won. And when the time is right, I'm going to show them exactly what happens when you mistake a quiet man for a weak one." Helen sat very still for a moment, absorbing everything I had said. Then she reached down to the large handbag she had brought with her, the same worn leather bag she had carried for as long as I could remember. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out a folder of her own, its cover the same shade of blue as the one I had retrieved from Maggie's box. "Arthur," she said quietly, "there's something I need to give you, something I should have given you sooner, but I wasn't sure if the time was right." She placed the folder on the table between us. "Maggie came to see me 3 months before she died. She was weak, could barely walk without help, but she insisted on making the trip herself. She said there were things she needed to put in place while she still could. I stared at the folder, my heart suddenly beating faster. She never told me she visited you. She asked me not to say anything. She didn't want to worry you, and she didn't want to plant suspicions in your mind that might not be necessary. Helen's voice was heavy with the weight of a secret held too long. She gave me this folder and made me promise to keep it safe. She said, "Give this to Arthur only if Vanessa tries something, if everything goes well, and I'm wrong about her. Then burn it and let him remember our family in peace." "But Vanessa did try something," I said. Helen nodded. "I heard the rumors on Christmas Day. By the time New Year's came, half our friends had called me, asking if it was true. I knew then that Maggie's worst fears had come to pass." She pushed the folder closer to me. I never opened it. "Arthur, Maggie asked me not to, but whatever is inside, she wanted you to have it." When the time came, I picked up the folder slowly, feeling its weight in my hands. It was thicker than I expected, stuffed with papers that crinkled softly as I moved it for a moment. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to believe there was still some explanation, some misunderstanding that would make everything less terrible than it seemed. But I had spent 6 months watching Daniel and Vanessa plot against me. I was long past the point of comfortable illusions. I opened the folder. Inside were dozens of printed pages, each one a screenshot of text messages or emails. The dates ranged across 3 years, starting shortly after Daniel and Vanessa's wedding and continuing almost until the week Maggie entered hospice. I began to read, and with each page the picture became clearer and uglier. The earliest messages were from Vanessa to a friend I did not recognize. Complaining about family obligations, had to spend another Sunday with Daniel's parents. The old man just talks about his boring accounting work, and Maggie makes everything about her illness. I don't know how much longer I can pretend to care. Another message dated a few months later. Daniel's father is such dead weight, he thinks, because he paid for half the wedding. He has a say in our lives, can't wait until they're both gone and we can finally live without their interference. The messages grew worse over time. There were discussions about money, about inheritance, about how to manage me after Maggie died. One email sent to Daniel laid out a detailed plan for gaining access to my accounts. "Your dad trusts you completely," Vanessa had written. "We just need to be patient. Once your mom is gone, he'll be so lost that he'll sign anything we put in front of him." My hands were shaking by the time I reached the final page. It was a message Vanessa had sent to her sister, dated 2 weeks before Maggie's death. "The old woman can't last much longer. Once she's out of the picture, Arthur will be easy to control. He's too soft to fight back. We'll have everything within a year." I closed the folder and sat in silence, unable to speak. Helen reached across and touched my arm. "Maggie saw all of this," she said gently. "She found ways to access Vanessa's messages, to document everything that was being planned. She told me once, near the end, I won't always be there to protect him, so I'm leaving him armor." Helen's eyes glistened with tears. She knew this day would come. Arthur, she knew what Vanessa was, and she spent her final months making sure you wouldn't face it alone. I thought of Maggie in those last weeks, frail and exhausted, using what little strength she had left, not to rest, but to gather evidence to build a shield around me that would hold. Even after she was gone, the depth of her love, the fierce protectiveness that had defined our entire marriage, extended even beyond death. She was always the smarter one. I murmured, my voice thick with emotion. I spent 40 years thinking I was taking care of her, and all along she was taking care of me. Helen smiled through her tears. That's what she'd say. She told me Arthur will probably feel guilty that I did all this while I was sick. Tell him not to be. Tell him it gave me purpose. It gave me something to fight for when my body had nothing left to give. I looked down at the 2 folders now sitting side by side on my table, at the evidence Maggie had gathered from different sources and stored in different places, ensuring that even if one was lost, the other would survive. She had thought of everything. She had prepared for every possibility. She had loved me enough to spend her dying days building weapons I might never need, just in case I did. Then my eyes fell on the USB drive, still sitting where I had placed it earlier. I picked it up and turned it over in my fingers, feeling its small weight, wondering what secrets it contained that the folders did not. If the folder is the armor, I murmured half. 2. Myself and half to Helen. Then what's on this drive? Helen shook her head slowly. I don't know, Maggie never mentioned it to me. I looked at the drive for a long moment, then set it down carefully beside the folders. Whatever was on it, I would find out soon. But first I needed to understand the full scope of what Maggie had built. I needed to see the complete picture before I decided how to use it, because when the time came to act, I wanted to make sure I honored her sacrifice. I wanted to make sure that every piece of armor she had forged would serve its purpose, and I wanted Vanessa to understand, in the end, exactly who she had underestimated. Robert Klein's office occupied the 3rd floor of a modest brick building in downtown Denver, the same building where Maggie and I had first met him nearly 30 years ago. He had handled our wills, our property purchases, and eventually the complex arrangements Maggie insisted on making during her final year of life. If anyone understood the full architecture of what we had built together, it was Robert. I arrived on a grey Tuesday morning, the folders and USB drive tucked securely in my briefcase. Helen had offered to come with me, but this was something I needed to do alone. The evidence Maggie had gathered was one thing, understanding the legal framework she had constructed was another. I needed to see the complete picture before I made any decisions. Robert greeted me at the door of his office with a firm handshake and a look of genuine concern. He was 60 years old, silver-haired and sharp-featured, with the calm demeanor of a man who had spent decades navigating other people's crises. He gestured for me to sit and close the door behind us. I heard what happened, he said, settling into his chair across from me. Word travels fast as our circle. I'm sorry, Arthur. I know this must be incredibly painful. It is. I admitted, but I'm not here to grieve. I'm here to understand exactly where I stand. Robert nodded slowly, a hint of something like respect flickering in his eyes. Then let's start with what they think they took and what they actually have access to. He pulled a file from his desk and opened it to reveal a series of documents covered in dense legal text. When Maggie came to me 4 years ago, she was very specific about what she wanted. She knew her health was declining, and she was concerned about certain vulnerabilities in your financial structure. Specifically, the joint savings account that Daniel had authorized user access to. I leaned forward. That account held $180. Correct. And Maggie understood that account was exposed. She called it the surface account. She knew that if anyone in the family decided to take advantage of your trust, that's where they would strike first. So she made a decision. Robert paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. She decided to let it stay exposed. I frowned. She wanted them to be able to access it. She wanted them to think. That was all there was. Robert turned a page in his file and pointed to a complex diagram of boxes and arrows. The surface account was a decoy. Arthur, a test and a trap. Combined, the real assets, the ones that actually matter, are here. He tapped a box labeled Lawson Family Irrevocable Trust. My breath caught slightly. The trust, Maggie's life insurance payout, your pension distributions, the investment portfolio you both built over 40 years. All of it was transferred into this trust during her final months. It's held under Colorado law, managed by an independent trustee, and completely inaccessible to anyone, except you. Robert looked up at me. Daniel and Vanessa have no claim to it. They're not named as beneficiaries. They're not even aware it exists. How much? I asked quietly. Robert met my eyes. $1. 2 million, the number hung in the air between us. I sat back in my chair, processing what he had told me. Maggie had spent her dying days not only gathering evidence against Vanessa, but restructuring our entire financial life to protect me. She had seen the threat coming years before it arrived and built walls I never knew existed. There's something else. Robert continued, his tone shifting to one of, "And caution that house Daniel and Vanessa bought with your money. I did some checking. After I heard the news, the property was sold through a tax abatement program, one of those county initiatives designed to encourage home ownership in certain neighborhoods. What does that mean? It means there are strings attached, deed restrictions, occupancy requirements, limitations on resale." Robert frowned. "Those programs always have conditions. Did they mention anything about restrictions when they told you about the purchase?" I shook my head. "They only mentioned that they got it below market value, that the sellers were desperate." Robert's frown deepened. "Sellers are usually desperate in those situations because they've discovered they can't sell. Normally the restrictions make it complicated." He made a note on his pad. "I'll look into the specifics, but if they didn't read the fine print carefully, they may have bought themselves a problem they don't yet understand." I absorbed this information slowly, adding it to the growing picture in my mind. Vanessa had been so eager to spend my money, so confident in her victory, that she had rushed into a purchase without doing proper due diligence. The irony was almost poetic. "Robert," I said quietly, "the surface account Daniel is still listed as an authorized user. He can still access what's left." "That's correct. But as the primary account holder, you have the right to revoke that access at any time." I looked out the window at the grey Denver sky, thinking about the months of silence, the Christmas Eve humiliation, the messages Maggie had saved, showing exactly what Vanessa thought of me. Then I turned back to Robert. "If I revoke Daniel's access," I asked, "what happens to their finances?" Robert held my gaze for a long moment when he spoke. His voice was measured and precise. "The credit cards they opened using your account as collateral would lose their backing. The automatic payments they've set up would bounce. The financial cushion they've been relying on would disappear. Overnight," he paused, "everything they've built on your money, Arthur, collapses." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the decision ahead of me. Not yet, I told myself, but soon, very soon. The drive home from Robert's office felt longer than usual. The streets of Denver passed by in a grey blur, but my mind was not on the road. It was on Daniel. It was on the boy I had raised, the man he had become, and the vast and painful distance between those two people. I pulled into my apartment complex and sat in the car for a long time, engine off hands, still on the steering wheel. The information Robert had given me was powerful. The evidence Maggie had gathered was damning. But none of it answered the question that haunted me most. How did we get here? How did the child I loved more than my own life become someone who could watch his wife humiliate me and laugh along? I closed my eyes and let the memories come. Daniel at 5 years old, running toward me across the backyard, arms outstretched, shouting for me to catch him. Daniel at 7, wobbling on his first bicycle, while I jogged alongside, ready to steady him if he fell. Daniel at 10, handing me a homemade card on Father's Day, the words, "Best Dad Ever," written in crooked letters with a crayon drawing of the two of us holding hands. I remembered helping him with college applications, staying up late to review his essays, driving him to campus for the first time, and pretending not to notice when he wiped tears from his eyes as we said goodbye. I remembered standing in the front row at his wedding, watching him exchange vows with Vanessa, feeling so proud that my heart could barely contain it. When did it change? When did the boy who ran to me for comfort become a man who would not meet my eyes? When did the son who once told me he wanted to be just like me become someone who could sit at a dinner table and call his father broke? I didn't have answers, only fragments, only moments that looking back might have been warnings I was too hopeful to see one memory in. Particular surfaced now sharp and clear. It was 3 months before Christmas, at a family dinner. I had almost forgotten we were at Daniel and Vanessa's old apartment before they moved into the house they bought with my money. The evening had been tense, in that subtle way their gatherings always were, with Vanessa controlling the conversation and Daniel drifting along in her wake at one point. Vanessa had excused herself to take a phone call in the bedroom the moment she left. Something shifted in Daniel's posture. He leaned toward me, his voice dropping low, his eyes flickering toward the hallway. "Dad," he said, "I need to tell you something." My heart had lifted for a moment. I thought he was finally going to talk to me, really talk the way he used to before Vanessa came into his life. "What is it, son?" But before he could answer, the bedroom door opened. Vanessa's heels clicked against the hardwood floor as she returned to the dining room. Daniel's face went pale. He straightened in his chair, looked down at his plate, and said nothing. "What were you two talking about?" Vanessa asked, her tone light, but her eyes sharp. "Nothing," Daniel said quickly. "Just work stuff." She smiled and changed the subject, and the moment was gone. Daniel never finished that thought. He never tried again. I dismissed it at the time, told myself it was nothing, but now, sitting in my cold car in the January darkness, I wondered what had he been about to say. What truth had died on his lips the moment his wife walked back into the room that night? I could not sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, turning the same questions over. And over in my mind the clock read 2 in the morning when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I picked it up and saw a text from Daniel. My heart pounded as I read the words on the screen. "Dad, I'm sorry for everything." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. 1,000 responses raced through my mind. "What are you sorry for? Why didn't you stop her? Do you have any idea what you've done?" I started to type, but before I could finish, the message vanished. The screen now showed nothing, as if the text had never existed. Daniel had deleted it. I sat up in bed, my pulse racing. The phone clutched in my hand. He had reached out for one brief moment in the middle of the night. My son had tried to say something real, and then he had pulled it back, erased it, retreated into the silence that had become his shield. I set the phone down and lay back against the pillows, but sleep was impossible now. The darkness pressed in around me, and with it came a question I could not escape. Was Daniel's silence weakness? Was he simply too spineless to stand up to Vanessa, too comfortable in his complicity to risk his easy life? Or was it something else was there? Fear behind those pale cheeks and averted eyes was. My son, not a willing accomplice, but a prisoner trapped in something he did not know how to escape. I did not know, but I realized lying there in the dark that the answer mattered. It mattered more than the money, more than the betrayal, more than anything else, because if Daniel was weak, then I had lost him forever. But if Daniel was afraid, then perhaps there was still something left to save. January melted into February, and I let them believe they had won. It was not difficult to play the part of a broken man. I simply stopped fighting when Vanessa called to ask if I could babysit Lily on short notice. I agreed without complaint. When she suggested I might want to downsize my apartment to save money, I nodded and said I would think about it when she spoke to me in that slow, patronizing tone she reserved. For people she considered beneath her, I swallowed my pride and responded with quiet gratitude. Each small surrender fed her confidence. I could see it in the way her posture relaxed around me, the way her voice lost its defensive edge. She no longer watched me for signs of resistance. She had decided I was exactly what she always believed. I would be a tired old man who had accepted his place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. "See," I overheard her say to Daniel one afternoon when they thought I was out of earshot, "he's finally coming around. I told you, he just needed time to process. Old people are like that. They resist change at first, but eventually they adapt." Daniel murmured something I could not hear, but his tone carried the unmistakable weight of doubt. Whatever response Vanessa gave him must have been sharp, because he fell silent after that. I filed away these observations and continued my performance. Let her feel safe. Let her believe the battle was over. The longer she underestimated me, the more complete my eventual response would be. By late February, Vanessa had moved on to phase 2 of her plan. I learned about it the way I learned most things now, through careful listening and patient observation. She raised the subject at a Sunday dinner, her voice casual but calculated. "You know, I've been thinking," she said, refilling her wineglass while glancing in my direction. "Dad seems so lonely in that apartment, all by himself, no one to talk to, nothing to do all day. It must be depressing." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "He seems fine to me, does he, though?" Vanessa tilted her head with practiced concern. "I mean, look at him. He's lost weight, he barely talks. I think he might be happier somewhere, with more support. One of those assisted living communities where there are activities and people his own age." I kept my expression neutral, my eyes on my plate, my hands steady around my fork, and honestly, Vanessa continued lowering her voice, as if sharing a secret we could really use. "The extra space his apartment would make a perfect storage unit, or we could rent it out, help cover some of our expenses." Daniel hesitated. I could feel his eyes on me, searching for something, a reaction, perhaps a sign that I was listening, that I still had fight left in me. I gave him nothing, I don't know. He said finally, "Maybe we should ask him what he wants." Vanessa laughed. "Of course we'll ask him. I'm just saying we should start researching options for his own good." The conversation moved on to other topics, but the seed had been planted. I understood now exactly how far Vanessa was willing to go. It was not enough to take my money. She wanted to take my independence, my dignity, my very presence in their lives. She wanted me tucked away in some facility where I would be out of sight and out of mind. Problem solved. Rather than a person looked that night after I returned to my apartment, I allowed myself a moment of cold anger. It burned in my chest, like ice sharp and clarifying. Then I set it aside. Anger was a luxury I could not afford. Not yet. The following week, something happened that would prove significant, though Vanessa did not realize it at the time. A letter arrived at their house from the county assessor's office I was visiting when the mail came watching from the living room as Vanessa sorted through the stack of envelopes. She paused at the official-looking letter, turned it over, and frowned at the dense legal language visible through the window of the envelope. "What's this?" she muttered. "What is it?" Daniel asked from the kitchen. Vanessa tore open the envelope, scanned the first few lines, and rolled her eyes. Just junk mail about property taxes, some kind of notice about the house. She crumpled the letter and tossed it into the trash without reading further. "I'll deal with it later." She never dealt with it. I know this because I checked the trash when no one was looking. The letter was still there, unread, its warnings ignored. I smoothed it out enough to see the words "notice of lien" and "tax abatement program" before I folded it carefully and returned it to the garbage. Robert had been right there, were strings attached to that house, and Vanessa, in her arrogance, had not bothered to learn what they were that evening alone in my apartment. I finally turned my attention to the USB drive Maggie had left me. I had been saving it, waiting for the right moment, sensing that whatever it contained would be the final piece of the puzzle now. With Vanessa's plans for my future becoming clear, I could wait no longer. I plugged the drive into my laptop and watched. As a folder appeared on the screen, inside were dozens of files, each one named. With careful precision, my finger hovered over the first one, V Messages 2, ulti1.pdf. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and clicked. The first folder contained exactly what I expected. Screenshots of text messages, dozens of them spanning nearly 2 years. Vanessa's words to friends, to colleagues, to her sister. Each message painted the same picture, a portrait of contempt hidden behind a smile. "Arthur still thinks we actually care about his visits," she had written to a friend named Jessica. "It's pathetic how desperate old people get for attention, but don't worry, once he signs everything over, we're putting him in a nursing home. Daniel's too spineless to stop me." Another message sent to her sister. "The old man keeps talking about family traditions, as if anyone cares about his stories. From 50 years ago, I smile and nod and count the days until I don't have to pretend anymore. And another dated just weeks before Christmas. Phase 1 is almost complete. Once the money's transferred, Phase 2 begins. By this time next year, Arthur will be someone else's problem. I read each message slowly, letting the words sink in. The cruelty was not surprising anymore. I had seen enough evidence to know who Vanessa really was, but seeing it laid out so starkly, message after message, year after year, still carried a weight that pressed against my chest. I closed the first folder and opened the second. This one contained emails. Most were between Vanessa and various financial advisors discussing strategies for family wealth management that somehow always involved gaining access to accounts that were not hers. But one email stood out from the rest. It was sent from Vanessa to Daniel, dated 8 months before Christmas. We need to talk about your father. She had written, I know you have some sentimental attachment to him, but we need to be practical. He's dead weight, Daniel. Every dollar he keeps is a dollar. We don't have every year. He stays in that apartment is another year. We're subsidizing his existence. I've done the math. If we can get control of his accounts within the next 6 months, we can accelerate our timeline significantly. Stop thinking of him as your father. Start thinking of him as an obstacle. Daniel had not replied to the email, or if he had, Maggie had not captured it. But the fact that Vanessa felt comfortable writing such things to my son told me everything I needed to know about their private conversations. I sat back in my chair, the screen glowing in the darkness of my apartment. The betrayal was complete, now documented in black and white, impossible to deny or explain away. But I had already made my peace with the betrayal. What I was not prepared for was what came next. The third folder contained only one file, an audio recording dated 3 weeks before Maggie died. My hand trembled as I moved the cursor over it. Some part of me knew what this was before I clicked. Some part of me had been waiting for it since the moment I found the USB drive. I pressed play for a moment. There was only silence, punctuated by the soft sound of labored breathing. Then came a voice I had not heard in 4 years, a voice that had once filled every room of our home with warmth and laughter, a voice I would have given anything to hear. One more time, Arthur, my love, Maggie's words were. Weak but clear, each one carefully chosen, each one carrying the weight of everything. She could not say in person, if you're listening to this, then I'm gone, and they've shown you who they really are. My vision blurred. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I wanted so many times. I wanted to shake you and make you see what I saw. But you loved Daniel so much, you believed in him so completely. I couldn't bear to be the one who broke that faith. Her voice cracked slightly, and I heard her take a shaky breath. But you deserve the truth, Arthur. You deserve to know that I saw this coming. That I spent my last months preparing for this moment, that I did everything I could to protect you. The tears were falling freely now, streaming down my face and dropping onto my hands. I didn't try to stop them. Protect yourself now, my darling. Use everything I've given you, and please don't let guilt or love or misplaced loyalty stop you from doing what needs to be done. There was a long pause filled with the sound of her breathing, then softer. I love you, I've always loved you, and I will be watching over you wherever I am. Be strong, Arthur, be the man I married. Be the man I know you still are. The recording ended. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat in the darkness for a long time, letting the grief wash over me. But it was not grief for the betrayal. It was not grief for the money or the lost trust or the son who had failed me. It was grief for Maggie, for the woman who had spent her dying days not resting, not seeking peace, but building armor for the husband she was leaving behind. Even in death, she was still protecting me. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. I straightened my back, and I reached for my phone. Robert answered on the second ring. Arthur, is everything all right? My voice was steady, steadier than it had been in months. It's time. Robert cut them off. I learned what happened next from Daniel himself, months later. When the dust had settled and the truth had finally broken through the walls between us, he told me every detail, his voice heavy with shame, and I listened without interruption. This is what he told me. It was a Saturday morning in early March. Vanessa had decided to take Lily shopping for new school clothes, a routine trip to the mall that should have been unremarkable. They wandered through the department store. Lily, clutching a purple sweater, she'd fallen in love with Vanessa piling items into her cart, with the casual confidence of someone who had never worried about money at the register. The cashier scanned the items and announced the total. Vanessa handed over her credit card without looking, already scrolling through her phone. A moment passed, then another. The cashier cleared her throat. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This card has been declined." Vanessa looked up annoyed. "That's impossible. Run it again." The cashier tried again. Same result. Vanessa pulled out a second card, then a third. Each one came back. Declined. The line behind her grew longer. Lily tugged at her sleeve, asking what was wrong. Vanessa's face flushed red as she fumbled for her phone and dialed the bank's customer service number. "There must be a mistake," she said, her voice rising. "I have excellent credit. These cards were working fine yesterday." The representative's response was calm and professional. "Ma'am, I'm showing that the primary account holder has revoked your authorized user access without that backing. Your credit limits have been adjusted accordingly." Vanessa's mouth opened, but no words came out. The primary account. Hold me." He abandoned the cart in the middle of the store, grabbed Lily's hand, and rushed to the car. The drive home was a blur of frantic phone calls, each one bringing worse news than the last. By the time she pulled into the driveway, the full scope of the disaster was becoming clear inside the house. The television displayed a blank screen with a message service disconnected. "Please contact your provider." Vanessa had signed up for the premium cable package using an account that listed me as the guarantor. Without my backing, the service had been terminated. She checked the mail and found a notice from the car financing company. The automatic payment had bounced without immediate action. The vehicle would be subject to repossession. Another envelope contained a letter from one of her credit card companies informing her that her limit had been reduced from $15 to $500 due to changes in her credit profile. Vanessa sat down at the kitchen table, surrounded by bills and notices, her hands shaking. This could not be happening. This was not supposed to happen. The old man was supposed to accept his fate, quietly fade into the background, become a problem she could manage from a distance. He was not supposed to fight back. That was when Daniel came home. He told me later that he had known something was wrong. The moment he walked through the door, Vanessa was sitting in the dark, the curtains drawn, her phone clutched in her hand. She looked up at him with wild eyes and started talking, the words tumbling out in a rush of panic and disbelief. "The cards are cancelled, the cable is gone, the car payment bounced, everything is falling apart, Daniel. Everything." She waited for him to react, to share her outrage, to join her in condemning me for this unforgivable act of rebellion. But Daniel's reaction was not what she expected. He didn't panic. He didn't shout or curse or reach for his own phone to call me with threats. Instead, something shifted in his expression. His shoulders, which had been hunched with tension for months, seemed to relax slightly. His jaw, perpetually clenched, loosened. "Daniel," Vanessa said, her voice rising, "did you hear me? Your father did this. He's trying to destroy us." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, and then, very quietly, he said, "Maybe we deserved it." Vanessa stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. "What did you just say?" But Daniel did not repeat himself. He walked past her up the stairs and closed the bedroom door behind him. For the first time in their marriage, he did not try to fix her problem. He didn't rush to soothe her anger or validate her grievances. He simply walked away. Vanessa sat alone in the gathering darkness, the reality of her situation pressing down on her like a physical weight. The carefully constructed life she had built on my money was crumbling, and for the first time she had no one to blame but herself. Her hands trembled as she picked up her phone and scrolled to my number. She had not called me in months. She had not needed to. I was supposed to be irrelevant, a minor character in the story of her success, but now, with everything falling apart around her, I was the only one who could explain what was happening. She pressed the call button and waited. I answered on the third ring. "Dad," she said, her voice stripped of its usual confidence, trembling with something that might have been fear. "What's happening? What did you do?" I let the silence stretch between us for a long moment, and then calmly I replied, "I did exactly what you taught me, Vanessa. I protected my interests. After that single phone call, I stopped answering." Vanessa tried again that night and the next morning and the morning. After that, over the following week, my phone filled with voicemails, each one a window into her unraveling. I listened to them once, sitting alone in my apartment with a cup of tea, letting her words wash over me like waves against a stone. The first messages were demanding, "Arthur, this is ridiculous. Call me back immediately. We need to discuss this like adults." Her voice carried the sharp edge of someone accustomed to being obeyed when I did not respond. The tone shifted. "Dad, please. I don't understand what's happening. We're family. Whatever I did to upset you, we can work it out." The pleading lasted for 2 days before it curdled into something uglier. "You think you can just cut us off after everything we've done for you? You ungrateful old man. We took you in for holidays. We let you see your granddaughter, and this is how you repay us." Her voice cracked with fury. "You'll regret this, I promise you, you will regret this, but threats require leverage," and Vanessa had none by the end of the week. Her messages had circled back to desperation. "Arthur, I'm begging you. Please just talk to me. I'll apologize. I'll do whatever you want. Just please, please call me back." I deleted them all without responding. There was nothing left to say. The time for talking had passed long ago on all those occasions when a simple conversation might have changed everything she had chosen. Silence when it served her. Now she could experience what that silence felt like from the other side. What happened next? I learned from Daniel during one of our later conversations. He told me about the night Vanessa remembered the letter. It was past midnight and she had been unable to sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through every financial account, every asset, every possible source of money that might save her from the collapse closing in around her, and then, like a cold hand gripping her throat, she remembered the envelope from the county assessor's office, the one she had glanced at and thrown away. Without reading, she leapt out of bed and ran downstairs to the kitchen. The trash had been taken out days ago, but she tore through the recycling bin. The pile of old newspapers, the stack of junk mail she had shoved into a drawer, finally crumpled beneath a pizza box in the garage. She found it. The letter was worse than she could have imagined. It was a notice of lien informing her that the previous owner of the property had an unresolved tax dispute with the county because Vanessa had declined title insurance to save a few $100s. At closing, the lien had transferred to her upon purchase. She now owed $17. It drew zero in back taxes she had never known existed, but that was only the beginning. The next morning, hands shaking, she called a real estate attorney. She explained the situation in a rush of words, hoping for reassurance, hoping for some legal loophole that would make the nightmare disappear. The attorney listened patiently, asked a few questions, and then delivered the news that would seal her fate. "Mrs. Lawson, the property you purchased was sold through a county tax abatement program. Are you familiar with the terms of that program?" Vanessa's voice was barely a whisper. "No, the program offers reduced property taxes in exchange for certain commitments from the buyer. One of those commitments is a deed restriction. You cannot sell the property for 5 years from the date of purchase. If you attempt to sell before that period ends, you will be required to repay all abated taxes, plus a 15% penalty." The room spun around her. How much would that be? The attorney paused, calculating based on the property value and the abatement schedule you're looking at, approximately $40. 0 in penalties on top of the 17, 0 lien, and any back taxes owed. Vanessa could not speak. The $180. 0 she had taken from me was now locked inside a house she could not sell, could not refinance, could not escape. The trophy she had been so proud of on Christmas Eve had become a cage. She hung up the phone and sat in the living room staring at the wall. She had been so eager to own the expensive paint, the designer fixtures, the gleaming hardwood floors. All of it felt different now. The house was no longer a symbol of her victory. It was a monument to her failure, a prison built with stolen money that she could neither use nor return. That evening, Daniel found her sitting in the same spot, still staring at nothing. He didn't ask what was wrong. He already knew. He had overheard enough of her phone calls, seen enough of the letters piling up, watched enough of her careful facade crumbled to understand that the life they had built was falling apart. He stood in the doorway for a long moment watching his wife. Then he pulled out his phone and sent a text message. Vanessa's phone buzzed on the table beside her. She picked it up and read the words on the screen. "We need to talk. I'm going to see Dad tomorrow alone." She looked up at Daniel, her eyes wide with betrayal. "You're going to him after what he's done to us?" Daniel met her gaze without flinching for the first time in their marriage. He did not look away. "What he's done," he said quietly, "or what we've done." He turned and walked upstairs, leaving Vanessa alone with the walls of her beautiful prison. Daniel told me everything that happened that night, and in the days that followed, he spared no details, offered no excuses for his own role in the disaster. I think he needed to confess as much as I needed to hear it. So I listened, and this is what he told me. The morning after his text message, Vanessa cornered him in the kitchen before he could leave. She had not slept. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair uncombed, her voice raw, from hours of crying and scheming and trying to find a way out of the trap that was closing around her. "You're actually going to him?" she demanded, blocking the doorway. "You're going to beg that old man for forgiveness after what he's done to us?" Daniel set down his coffee cup and looked at her. Something had shifted in him over the past few days. The weight he had carried for years, the constant tension of living a lie, had begun to lift in its place. Was something quieter, something that almost resembled peace. "What he's done to us," Daniel repeated slowly. "Vanessa, he didn't do anything to us. We did this, you did this." He paused, his voice dropping. "I just watched." Vanessa stared at him as if he had slapped her. "How dare you? I did this for us, for our family, for our future. You did this for yourself." Daniel said, "You took my father's money because you wanted a bigger house and a nicer car and a life that looked impressive to your friends. You didn't care who got hurt. You didn't care that he spent his whole life saving that money. You just saw something you wanted and you took it and you went along with it." Vanessa shot back, her voice rising. "Don't pretend you're innocent. You knew what we were doing. You helped." Daniel nodded slowly. "You're right, I did. And I have to live with that for the rest of my life." He picked up his keys from the counter. "But I'm done watching. I'm done being the man who stands by while his wife destroys his family." He walked past her and out the door. Vanessa didn't follow in the days that followed. She threw herself into finding a way out. She called banks about refinancing the house, hoping to pull out enough equity to stabilize their finances. But the lien made that impossible. No lender would touch a property with unresolved tax obligations. She called real estate agents about selling, only to be reminded of the deed restriction she had ignored when she signed the closing documents. She even considered renting out rooms to generate income, but the HOA covenant she had never bothered to read explicitly prohibited short-term rentals. Every door she tried was locked. Every exit was blocked. The house. She had been so proud of the symbol of her triumph over the foolish old man who thought family meant something had become a cage from which there was no escape. The final blow came from an unexpected source one afternoon. While checking the mail, Vanessa ran into their neighbor, a pleasant woman in her 60s, named Mrs. Patterson, who had lived on the street for over 20 years. They exchanged the usual pleasantries, and then Mrs. Patterson mentioned something that made Vanessa's blood run cold. "I was so glad when you bought this place," the older woman said, smiling warmly. "The previous owners were in such a rush to leave after that whole tax mess. I felt bad for them, really. They bought the house, not realizing all the restrictions that came with the abatement program when they tried to sell early. The county hit them with all those penalties. They were desperate to find a buyer who would take it off their hands. I suppose they got lucky with you." Vanessa stood frozen on the sidewalk. The mail clutched in her hands. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The house had been priced so low because it was a trap. The previous owners had not been desperate because of personal problems or job relocations. They had been desperate because they were drowning in the same restrictions that now held Vanessa prisoner. She had been so eager to spend my money, so confident in her own cleverness, that she had never stopped to ask the most basic question: why was this house such a great deal? Her greed had blinded her, her contempt for due diligence, for the boring details that, careful people like me spend our lives paying attention to, had led her straight into a pit of her own, making that evening. Daniel came home to find Vanessa sitting in the dark again. But this time he did not stop to comfort her or argue with her. He walked past the living room and up the stairs. She heard the closet door open, the sound of drawers being pulled out, the zip of a bag being packed. She found him in the bedroom, folding clothes into a small duffel bag. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice hollow. "I'm going to see my father. You already saw him." There was a note of panic beneath her words. "What else is there to say?" Daniel paused, the shirt still in his hands. When he looked at her, there was something in his eyes she had never seen before. Sadness, yes, but also resolve. "I'm going to tell him the truth," he said quietly. "Something I should have done 2 years ago." Vanessa's face went pale. "What truth? What are you talking about?" Daniel didn't answer. He finished packing, zipped the bag, and walked toward the door. Vanessa grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in. "Daniel, don't, whatever you're thinking of saying, don't, you'll ruin everything." He looked down at her hand, then gently removed it. "Everything is already ruined. Vanessa, the only question now is whether anything can be saved." He walked out without looking back. Vanessa stood alone in the bedroom, listening to his car pull out of the driveway, knowing with terrible certainty that whatever he was about to tell me would change everything. She was right. Daniel arrived at my apartment the next evening. I'd been expecting him, though I did not know exactly when he would come or what he would say. I only knew that something had broken open inside my son, and whatever emerged would determine whether there was anything left between us worth saving. When I opened the door, the man standing before me was almost unrecognizable. Daniel looked like he had not slept in days. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, his face carrying the hollow exhaustion of someone who had been running from something for far too long and had finally stopped. He did not greet me with the usual awkward pleasantries. He didn't ask how I was doing or comment on the weather. He simply stood there, his shoulders slumped, his hands hanging at his sides. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside and let him enter. He walked to the living room and sat down heavily on the couch, staring at the floor. I took my usual chair across from him and waited. Whatever he had come to say, he would say it in his own time. I had learned long ago that some truths cannot be rushed for several minutes. Neither of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the silence. Then Daniel lifted his head and looked at me with eyes that glistened with tears. He was struggling to hold back. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something I should have told you 2 years ago." I nodded but didn't speak. This was his moment, his confession. I would not make it easier or harder than it needed to be. Daniel took a shaky breath 2 years ago at a family dinner. "I tried to warn you about Vanessa, about what she was planning." He paused, swallowing hard. "You probably don't. Remember, it was just a moment we were at the table. Vanessa had gone to take a phone call, and I started to say something. I said, "Dad, I need to tell you." But then she came back and I stopped. I remembered the memory had surfaced recently. A fragment I had examined in the dark hours of sleepless nights, Daniel's pale face, his unfinished sentence, the way he had retreated the moment Vanessa reappeared. Remember, I said. Daniel's face crumpled. She heard me. She heard me start to say something, and she knew that night after you left, she confronted me. She was furious. She said his voice broke and he had to stop to compose himself. She said if I ever tried to warn you again, she would file for divorce. She said she would take Lily away from me. She said I would see my daughter on weekends only supervised. Through a lawyer, he looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. She said, "Try me, Daniel. See what happens." The words hung in the air between us. Heavy with all the years of silence, they explained I was terrified. Daniel continued, his voice raw. Lily was 5 years old. She was my whole world. The thought of losing her, of becoming some stranger who showed up twice a month while Vanessa poisoned her against me, I couldn't bear it. So I stayed quiet. I told myself I was protecting my daughter, but the truth is, I was a coward. I chose my comfort over your dignity. I watched her humiliate you, take your money, laugh at your ruin. And I said nothing because I was afraid he buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I know it doesn't change anything. I know I can't take back what happened, but I needed you to know. I needed you to understand that I didn't want this. I never wanted this." I sat in silence for a long moment, letting his words settle into me. The anger I had carried for months, the grief over losing my son, the bitter certainty that he had chosen greed over love. All of it shifted and rearranged itself in light of this new truth. Daniel had not been a willing accomplice. He had been a hostage. Vanessa had used the one thing he loved most, his daughter, as a weapon to ensure his compliance. She had trapped him just as surely as she had trapped me, using fear instead of money, silence instead of theft. But understanding is not the same as absolution. Daniel had still made choices. He had still stood by. While I was humiliated, he had still allowed years to pass. Without finding a way to break free, you were trapped, I said finally, my voice steady. I understand that now. Vanessa used Lily against you the same way she used my trust against me. Daniel looked up, hope flickering in his red-rimmed eyes. But being trapped, I continued, doesn't mean you stop trying to escape. It doesn't mean you give up and accept your cage. It means you fight harder. It means you find another way. You had 2 years, Daniel, 2 years, to figure out how to warn me. Without Vanessa knowing, 2 years to build a case, to document her behavior, to find a lawyer who could protect your custody rights. Instead, you did nothing. You waited until everything collapsed before you found the courage to speak. The hope in his eyes dimmed, replaced by the heavy weight of acknowledgement. He knew I was right. He had always known. "I'm not saying this to punish you," I added, my voice softening. "I'm saying it because you need to hear it. You need to understand that what happened wasn't entirely Vanessa's fault. You had a part in it too, and if we're ever going to rebuild something real between us, it has to start with you accepting that." Daniel nodded slowly, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "I know. I know I failed you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not even asking for another chance. I just wanted you to know the truth before I could respond." The doorbell rang. I rose and walked to the door, a strange sense of inevitability settling over me. I looked through the peephole and saw a face I had expected to see eventually, though not quite this soon. Vanessa stood in the hallway, her makeup streaked with tears, her hands trembling at her sides. She looked nothing like the confident, calculating woman who had announced her theft on Christmas Eve. She looked broken. "Let me in," she said, her voice cracking. "Please, Arthur, we need to talk." I opened the door. Vanessa stood in the hallway, a shadow of the woman who had sat across from me on Christmas Eve and announced her theft with such casual triumph. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, Her hair unwashed her face, a ruin of smeared mascara and sleepless nights. She looked at me with eyes that held something I had never seen in her before. Desperation. "Thank you," she whispered, stepping inside before I could change my mind. "Thank you for letting me in." I said nothing. I simply closed the door and walked back to the living room where Daniel still sat on the couch, his face pale with apprehension. Vanessa followed her heels, clicking against the hardwood floor, and stopped when she saw her husband Daniel. She said, her voice catching, "You're here." He did not respond. He did not even look at her. Whatever bond had once existed between them, whatever alliance had made them partners in my betrayal, it was gone now. Daniel had made his choice, and it was not her. Vanessa turned back to me, her hands clasped in front of her like a supplicant approaching a throne. "Arthur, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But please let me explain." I sat down in my chair and gestured for her to speak. If she wanted to make her case, I would let her. I had waited this long, I could wait a few more minutes. She launched into her defense with the desperation of a drowning woman grasping at driftwood. "It was a misunderstanding. I never meant to hurt you. I was trying to help the family, to invest your money in something that would benefit all of us. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Daniel's career wasn't going well. The bills were piling up, and I thought, if I could just get us into a better position." She went on like this for several minutes, weaving a narrative in which she was the victim of circumstances, a loving daughter-in-law who had made difficult choices for noble reasons. The tears flowed freely, the apologies multiplied, the explanations grew more elaborate. I listened without interrupting. I let her spin her story, let her believe that perhaps she was getting through to me, that her words were having their intended effect. And when she, finally, fell silent, breathless and hopeful, I reached for my phone. "I want to play something for you," I said quietly. Vanessa's expression flickered with confusion, then concern. "What is it?" I pressed. Play. The first recording filled the room with Vanessa's own voice, bright and casual, speaking to a friend. "Arthur still thinks we actually care about his visits. It's pathetic how desperate old people get. But don't worry once he signs everything over, nursing home for him. Daniel's too spineless to stop me." Vanessa's face went white. "Where did you?" I held up my hand and let the next recording play. This one was her email to Daniel, read aloud by a text-to-speech program Maggie had set up. "Your father is dead weight. Every dollar he keeps is $1. We don't have stop thinking of him as your father. Start thinking of him as an obstacle." The color drained further from Vanessa's cheeks. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The final recording was the worst. Vanessa, laughing with her sister at her voice dripping with contempt. "The old woman can't last much longer once she's out of the picture. Arthur will be easy to control. He's too soft to fight back. He'll never figure out what we're doing. We'll have everything within a year." I stopped the playback. The silence that followed was absolute. Vanessa stood frozen in the middle of my living room, her carefully constructed defense shattered beyond repair. She could not claim misunderstanding. She could not pretend noble intentions. Her own words, preserved by the wife she had dismissed as a dying inconvenience, had condemned her completely. "Maggie knew," I said, my voice calm and even. "She saw exactly who you were years before I did. She spent her final months gathering evidence, building a record of every cruel word you ever spoke about me. She did it because she loved me, because she knew that one day I would need proof that I wasn't imagining things, that I wasn't being paranoid or ungrateful or difficult." I stood and looked at Vanessa with something that was not quite anger and not quite pity. It was closer to finality. "I'm not going to destroy you," I said. "I'm not going to take the house or sue you for the money or make your life any more difficult than you've already made it yourself. That's not who I am. That's not who Maggie raised me to be." Vanessa's eyes flickered with something like hope. "But I am done," I continued. "No more money, no more support, no more pretending that we are family. You are not my daughter, you never were, and after today you are nothing to me at all." I turned to Daniel, who sat motionless on the couch, tears streaming silently down his face. "The door isn't closed forever for you, son, but it's not open either. You'll have to earn your way back starting now, starting with the choices you make from this moment forward." Daniel nodded, unable to speak. I walked to the front door and opened it goodbye. Vanessa, she stumbled toward me, her hand reaching out to grab my arm. "Wait, please wait. What about Lily? She's your granddaughter. You can't just cut her out of your life. She loves you." I paused, my hand on the doorframe. The mention of Lily struck something deep in my chest, a tenderness that even Vanessa's betrayal could not extinguish that. Little girl had done nothing wrong. She was innocent of her mother's schemes, untouched by the ugliness that had consumed the adults around her. "Lily is welcome in my life," I said quietly. "She will always be welcome. I will always be her grandfather." I turned to look at Vanessa one final time, but you are not. She stood in the doorway, mouth open, no words left to say. I watched her walk down the hallway. Toward the elevator, her shoulders hunched, her steps unsteady. She did not look back when she was gone. I closed the door and leaned against it, letting out a breath I had not realized I was holding. It was over. Not the pain, not the healing, not the long road that lay ahead, but this chapter at least was finished, and for the first time in months I felt something that might have been peace. 6 months passed, and the world kept turning. I learned about Vanessa's life in fragments, pieces of information that drifted to me through Daniel. During our Sunday visits, I didn't ask for these updates, but he offered them anyway. Perhaps his proof that justice had been served, perhaps his penance for his own role in what had happened. The luxury SUV was the first thing to go. Vanessa sold it to a dealership for far less than she had paid the money, swallowed immediately by the lien that hung over the house like a curse. Next went the designer handbags, the jewelry, the expensive clothes that had once filled her closets. She sold them online one by one, watching her carefully curated image dissolve into a stream of small transactions that barely covered her mounting debts by spring. She had taken a job as a receptionist at a dental office across town. It was her first real employment in 15 years. Daniel told me she came home exhausted every evening, her feet aching from standing, her pride worn down by the endless parade of patients who looked through her as if she were furniture. The woman who had once laughed about putting me in a nursing home now spent her days answering phones and filing paperwork. Trapped in a life she had never imagined for herself, the house remained, of course. She could not sell it, could not escape it, could not do anything but live within its walls and remember what it had cost her. Daniel said she had stopped decorating, stopped maintaining the careful appearance that had once meant so much to her. The rooms grew dusty. The garden withered the beautiful prison she had built. With my money became a monument to her own undoing. Daniel himself had changed in ways I was only beginning to understand. He filed for divorce 2 months after our confrontation, citing irreconcilable differences. The proceedings were surprisingly civil. Vanessa, perhaps too exhausted to fight, agreed to shared custody of Lily without the vicious battle Daniel had feared for so long. He moved into a modest apartment near his office, a small 2-bedroom place with second-hand furniture and walls that needed painting. Every Sunday he drove to see me. At first our conversations were awkward, filled with long silences and careful words. We were strangers learning to know each other again, father and son rebuilding a bridge that had been burned years ago, but slowly, week by week, something began to grow. Between us, not the easy closeness we had once shared, but something new, something earned. Daniel was learning to be a son again, and I was learning to let him. As for me, I had moved to Florida in early spring. The condo overlooked the Gulf Coast, a bright and airy space with large windows that let in the morning sun. I bought it with money from the trust. Maggie had created the assets Vanessa had never known existed. 1. 2 million carefully invested and quietly growing more than enough to fund the life I had always dreamed of living. I thought of the irony, sometimes sitting on my balcony with a cup of coffee watching the waves roll in. Vanessa had believed she was taking everything she had calculated, my visible savings, planned her theft down to the last dollar, and congratulated herself on her cleverness. She never, in thought to ask what else might exist. She never imagined that the quiet old man she dismissed as dead weight had been planning for the future longer than she had been alive. The 90% she stole was real, but it was never the whole picture. It was only what I had allowed her to see. I filled my days with things that mattered. I volunteered at the local library 3 mornings a week, helping elderly patrons navigate computers and recommending books to curious children. I traveled to places Maggie and I had always planned to visit, carrying her photograph with me, talking to her in quiet moments as if she could still hear. I read the books she had always recommended, the ones I had put off during the busy years of work and family, discovering worlds I'd never taken time to explore. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was at peace. One Sunday afternoon in October, my phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. I picked it up, expecting the usual update about his week, or a question about our next visit. Instead, I found a photograph. It was a drawing, the kind children make in school with crayons and oversized paper. Lily had created it for a class assignment about families. The figures were simple stick-like shapes with round heads and bright smiles. There was a small figure labeled Mia in purple crayon, a taller figure labeled Daddy in blue, and in the center of the page, holding a hand on each side connecting everyone together, was a figure labeled Grandpa. I stared at the picture for a long time, my vision blurring with tears. I did not try to stop after everything that had happened. After all the betrayal and heartbreak and loss, this was what remained: a 7-year-old girl who still believed in family, a son who was finding his way back, and a grandfather who had learned at last that some things cannot be stolen. Not love, not hope, not the quiet knowledge that you have lived your life with dignity. Those were the real savings, and they were worth more than any amount of money. 1 year. 2. The day after the Christmas that changed everything, Daniel brought Lily to visit me in Florida. I heard them before I saw them, the sound of small feet pounding up the walkway to my condo, followed by a voice I'd come to treasure more than almost anything else in my life: Grandpa. Grandpa, we're here. I opened the door, and Lily launched herself into my arms with the full force of her 8-year-old enthusiasm. I caught her and held her tight, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, feeling her small arms wrap around my neck as if she never wanted to let go. I missed you so much, she said into my shoulder. I missed you too, sweetheart, more than you know. Daniel stood behind her, carrying a small suitcase and wearing a smile that reached his eyes in a way it had not for many years. He looked healthier than he had in a long time. The shadows beneath his eyes faded, his posture straighter, his face carrying the quiet peace of a man who had stopped running from himself. "Hey, Dad," he said. "Hey, son, come in." The week that followed was one of the happiest I could remember. Lily wanted to see everything, do everything, experience everything the Florida coast had to offer. We walked along the beach, collecting seashells, her delighted shrieks echoing across the sand. Every time she found one she deemed worthy of her growing collection. I taught her to play checkers on the old board Maggie and I had used for decades, laughing as she scrunched up her face in concentration and occasionally letting her win when she needed the encouragement. In the evenings after dinner, she would curl up beside me on the couch and ask for stories about Grandma Maggie. I told her about the day we met 2 young people at a county fair who bumped into each other at a lemonade stand and ended up talking until the stars came out. I told her about our wedding, small and simple, held in Maggie's parents' backyard, with homemade decorations and a cake her mother had baked herself. I told her about the adventures we had, shared the quiet moments that meant the most, The love that had grown deeper with every passing year. Lily listened to every story with wide eyes, absorbing the grandmother she had never truly known, but was learning to love through my memories. And in telling those stories, I found that the grief I had carried for 4 years had transformed into something gentler, not gone, never gone, but softened by time and distance, into a presence I could live with, a companion, rather than a weight on the last evening of their visit. After Lily had fallen asleep in the guest room, Daniel and I sat together on the balcony. The sun was setting over the Gulf painting, the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed too beautiful to be real. We sat in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the light change, listening to the distant sound of waves. Finally, Daniel spoke. His voice was quiet, tentative, carrying the weight of a question he had been holding for a long time. "Dad, do you think you'll ever fully forgive me?" I considered the question carefully. It deserved a real answer, not a platitude or a reassurance designed to make him feel better. Daniel had earned my honesty, even when honesty was difficult. "Forgiveness isn't a moment, son," I said at last. "It's not something that happens all at once, like flipping a switch. It's a direction, a path you choose to walk one step at a time." I turned to look at him, seeing in his face the boy I had raised and the man he was becoming. "You're walking the right way. You've been walking it for a year now. Keep going." Daniel nodded slowly, blinking back tears. "I will, and promise." We sat together until the last light faded from the sky, and then he went inside to check on Lily. I remained on the balcony alone with the darkness and the sound of the sea. My eyes found Maggie's photograph on the shelf, visible through the window, the same image I had carried with me from Denver, the same smile that had guided me through the hardest year of my life. I remembered something she had asked me once years ago, when I had refused to buy myself a new coat because I wanted to save the money. "What are you saving for Arthur? You never spend anything on yourself." At the time, I had not known how to answer. I had mumbled something about retirement, about rainy days, about wanting to be prepared, but those were not the real reasons. I understood that now I had been saving my dignity, myself. Respect my ability to look at myself in the mirror and know that I had lived according to my values, even when it would have been easier to let them go. Those were the things that could not be measured in dollars, could not be deposited in bank accounts, could not be stolen by people who saw only numbers. Vanessa had taken 90% of my visible savings. She had taken the money I had let her see, but she had never touched the things that actually mattered. She could not touch them because they were not hers to take. I stood and walked to the balcony railing, feeling the ocean breeze in my hair, hearing Lily's laughter, as she apparently woke up and convinced Daniel to play one more game before bed. The sound drifted out to me like music, like proof that life goes on, that joy survives, that family can be rebuilt from the wreckage of betrayal. They thought they took everything I said softly, speaking to Maggie's memory, to the stars beginning to emerge overhead, to the vast and peaceful darkness. They only took what I let them see, the rest. The peace, the freedom, the self-respect, those were never theirs to touch. The waves rolled in below, steady and eternal. Lily's laughter rose again from inside, pure and bright, and I stood there in the quiet, surrounded by everything that truly mattered, finally understanding what I had been saving all along. Some people measure wealth in dollars. I measure mine in the quiet I finally found. If you have stayed with me until now, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. This story was not easy to tell, and I imagine it was not easy to hear, but some truths need to be spoken even when they hurt, especially when they hurt. I shared my story because I know I'm not alone. There are countless people out there who have been betrayed by the ones they loved most, who have been made to feel small and worthless by family members who should have protected them. If you are one of those people, I want you to know something important. You are not weak for trusting. You are not foolish for loving, and you are never too old to stand up for yourself. Vanessa thought I was just a tired old man who would accept whatever she decided to do with my life. She was wrong, and anyone who underestimates you because of your age, your kindness, or your quiet nature is wrong too. I would love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength to move forward? Please share your story in the comments below. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story touched your heart, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. We share stories of resilience, justice, and the quiet strength that lives inside all of us. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share it with them. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give is the reminder that they are not alone. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And remember, the quietest people often carry the greatest strength.